What would you do if a 9-year-old homeless black girl, wearing duct tape boots and carrying nothing but a notebook, looked you in the eye and said, "Sir, I can make your son walk again"? And what if she wasn't wrong? In a world where specialists charge thousands and hope often comes with a clipboard, one girl had neither a license nor a home. But what she did have was belief, real belief, the kind that heals what medicine can't. This is not a story about magic. It's a story about memory muscle and the power of someone who refused to give up, even when she had nothing left to give. And it all started on a cold morning, outside a children's hospital, when everything stopped. It was one of those gray mornings in Birmingham, Alabama, where the cold didn't quite bite hard enough to snow, but still crept into your fingertips and settled in your breath like ghost smoke. The Children's Medical Center on 7th Avenue was already buzzing before the clock hit 8. Parents with sleepy eyes and worried hands rushed in and out, clutching paper coffee cups bundled in scarves, coats too thin for the wind moving quickly, as if they could outrun whatever pain or diagnosis brought them to that sterile place. But amidst all that motion, people hurrying with grim purpose, nurses half jogging with clipboards, kids wheeled in strollers with stuffed animals strapped to their laps, there was one person who wasn't moving at all. She sat alone beside the glass revolving doors on a flattened cardboard box that once held produce her back straight, despite the chill, a small notebook resting on her knees. Her name was Zaria Carter. She was just 9 years old. Her boots were scuffed and patched with duct tape. Her coat was 2 sizes too big, the sleeves rolled back over tiny wrists. A red knit hat, tugged low over her brow, barely hid the tight braids tucked beneath. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She didn't ask for food, didn't hold up a sign, didn't chase passersby with trembling hands. She was simply present, drawing, watching, breathing. She was there most Saturdays, and after a while the hospital staff stopped trying to make her leave. A nurse had once asked where her parents were, but Zaria only smiled and said softly, "I'm just waiting," and after that they let her be. She didn't cause trouble. She smiled when spoken to, said thank you when someone dropped a granola bar in her lap, and spent the rest of her time scribbling carefully in that notebook, eyes always watching, always listening. She noticed everything, like the way the ambulance drivers leaned on their horns a little longer when it was cloudy, the way doctors walked faster on Fridays. And this morning, she noticed something else. A dark gray Range Rover pulled up to the curb, not quite parking, not quite idling either. Inside the vehicle sat a man in his late 40s with silver streaks at his temples, dressed in a tailored suit with the tie loosened just enough to suggest fatigue. Jonathan Reeves. He was the kind of man who looked like he owned buildings and bought stocks over breakfast. But today he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His jaw clenched, his eyes rimmed red, one hand gripping the steering wheel like it might float away. In the back seat was a little boy, maybe 6 years old, wrapped in a pink and blue blanket, sitting motionless in a booster seat. His name was Eli Reeves. His brown hair fell gently over his forehead, one curl tucked neatly behind an ear. His cheeks were pale, too pale, and his legs lay straight under the blanket, unnaturally straight, stiff, immobile. A car accident 3 months ago had taken his ability to walk, maybe forever. Doctors had used phrases like spinal trauma, nerve disconnection, extensive rehabilitation. But none of those terms erased the image Jonathan saw every night when he closed his eyes. Eli falling screaming, and then nothing. Just stillness. Silence. Now, as Jonathan stepped out of the car and moved to the back, his expression hardened into the careful mask he wore every time they entered the hospital. He opened the back door, gently lifted Eli with both arms, and held him against his chest like he was made of glass. Eli didn't speak. He rarely did anymore. He just leaned his head into his father's shoulder and closed his eyes. And that's when it happened. As Jonathan passed the revolving door, a soft voice called out, not loud, not demanding, but with a clarity that sliced through the chaos around it like a needle through cloth. "Sir," the voice said, "I can make your son walk again." Jonathan froze, not because he was angry or confused, but because of the way the words were said. There was no desperation, no nervousness, no joke buried underneath. Just calm certainty, like the speaker believed it with every fiber of their being. Slowly he turned, adjusting Eli's weight in his arms, and his eyes landed on the little girl sitting beside the door. Zaria had stood up now, her notebook tucked under her arm, her breath puffing in small clouds as she looked up at him. Her face was calm, serious. Her eyes didn't flinch from his. "What did you just say?" Jonathan asked, his voice low. "I said I can help him walk again," she repeated. Her tone was the same gentle, sincere, unshaken. Jonathan's arms tightened around Eli protectively. "That's not funny, kid. I wasn't joking," Zaria replied. No smile, no sarcasm. Just stillness. A stillness that didn't belong to a 9-year-old. Jonathan looked her up and down, the duct tape on her boots, the sleeves swallowed her hands, the cracked spiral binding of her notebook. His jaw clenched tighter. This had to be some bizarre scam. Maybe she was trained to say things beg for money. He didn't have time for this. Without another word, he turned and walked into the building. But the words followed him, echoed inside him. "I can make your son walk again." Not, "I hope not." Maybe. Just, "I can." Inside the hospital, he went through the motions. Registration, waiting, therapy room. More waiting, more sighs. Doctors with kind eyes gave him long speeches about muscle atrophy and adaptive devices. But none of them said what the little girl had said. That voice, it stayed in his head like a whisper that refused to fade. Hours passed. When he stepped out of the hospital carrying Eli once more, the clouds had broken slightly, letting pale sunlight warm the sidewalk. And there she was, still there. Same box, same notebook, same eyes, watching. She didn't wave, she didn't speak, but she looked at him like she'd known he'd come back. And he had. Against every ounce of logic. Against his better judgment. Jonathan hesitated, then walked toward her. "You again?" he muttered. "Why would you say something like that?" "You think this is funny?" Zaria shook her head slowly. "No, sir." "You don't even know him," Jonathan snapped, setting Eli gently in the back seat. "You don't know what he's been through. What I've been through." Zaria didn't blink. "I don't have to know him to help." Jonathan straightened. "You're what, 9, almost 10. You're just a kid sitting outside a hospital in broken shoes. What could you possibly know about helping someone like my son?" Zaria looked down at her hands, then quietly said, "My mama used to help people walk again. She was a physical therapist. She taught me things. She said the body remembers even when it forgets for a while." Jonathan was silent. He didn't know why he didn't walk away. Maybe it was the way the girl's voice didn't waver. Maybe it was the way Eli was watching from the window, now curious for the first time in weeks. "So," what Jonathan asked finally, "you watched your mom do a few stretches and now you think you're a doctor?" Zaria looked up. "I watched her help a man walk after 5 years in a chair. She didn't have machines. She had hands, and patience, and faith." Jonathan opened his mouth, then closed it. Behind him, a nurse passed by and gave Zaria a wave. A janitor nodded at her. These people, they knew her. "I'm not giving you money," he said flatly. "I didn't ask for money," she replied. "Then what do you want?" Zaria took a breath. "Just 1 hour. Let me show you." Jonathan looked at Eli. His son was awake now, looking between them. There was something new in his face, a softness, an interest. Jonathan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I should walk away right now," he muttered. Zaria didn't move. "I should call security." Still, she stayed silent. Jonathan exhaled hard. "Fine. You want to waste your time, kid? Meet us at Harrington Park tomorrow. Noon. Don't be late." Zaria nodded once. "I'll be there." As Jonathan drove away, he didn't look back. But in the rearview mirror, Zaria stood still, hands at her sides, eyes watching. And somehow, despite everything, Jonathan Reeves felt something stir inside his chest, something he thought he'd buried long ago. Not hope, not yet, but the memory of what it used to feel like. It was just past 11:30 the next day when Zaria Carter arrived at Harrington Park, a place most people passed without notice, its paint-chipped swing sets and squeaky chains rarely attracting families anymore. The cracked basketball court stood half empty, a faded oak tree casting long shadows across the neglected grass. She walked with a steady rhythm, her duct-taped boots crunching faintly against the frost-touched gravel path. In one hand, she held the same small gym bag. She always carried a bag that once belonged to her mother, its zipper half broken and its strap tied in a knot. In the other, her precious notebook. She chose the bench closest to the oak, the one with a slight tilt that no one liked. She laid out a small towel folded neatly and placed her items in a line, a jar of cocoa butter, a tennis ball, two soft cloths wrapped around warm rice, and a pair of thick socks. This wasn't magic. It was preparation. She sat and waited her breath, puffing quietly, hands folded in her lap, calm like always. At exactly 12:07 p.m., a dark gray Range Rover pulled up at the far end of the park. The moment Jonathan stepped out, Zaria could feel that wall around him still firm, still skeptical. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, just opened the back and gently lifted Eli out, setting the boy carefully into his wheelchair. Eli looked quieter than usual, but not unhappy. He didn't hide his face like the day before. Zaria stood. "Hi again," she said politely. Jonathan gave a stiff nod. Eli waved a small movement. "Hi," he said, barely audible. "Hi, Eli." Zaria replied. Jonathan's brow furrowed. "How do you know his name?" "You said it yesterday," she answered simply. "I remember stuff." Jonathan gestured at the towel. "So, what now, magic carpet ride?" His voice was half sarcastic. Zaria ignored the jab. "No, sir, just the basics." She opened her bag and began to explain. "The rice is for heat. It helps loosen the muscles. The ball is for pressure points. The socks are to keep the warmth in." Jonathan crossed his arms again, still watching, still judging. Zaria turned to Eli. "If it's okay with you," she said gently, "I'd like to work with your legs a little. Nothing hurts, I promise. And if anything feels weird, just tell me and I'll stop. Okay?" Eli looked up at his dad. Jonathan exhaled. "You can try. Just be careful." Zaria knelt beside the chair. She gently unwrapped the blanket from Eli's legs and placed the warm rice pack over his thighs. He flinched. "Too hot?" she asked. He shook his head. "It feels good." She nodded, waited, then slowly she began. Not pulling, not forcing, just small careful rotations. One leg at a time. Her fingers moved like they had done this 100 times before. Because they had. With her mother. In shelters. On mats. With soldiers and grandmothers and children, no one else could help. Jonathan stood close ready to intervene. But he didn't have to. "You ever do this before?" he asked, his voice low. Zaria didn't look up. "My mom used to take me to the shelter after school. She helped veterans, people who couldn't afford therapy. Said everyone deserves to feel human again. I used to carry her bag. And she taught you this stuff." "Yeah," she said, "the body doesn't always need machines, just attention." She gently tapped on Eli's knee with her knuckle. "Do you feel that?" "No," Eli whispered. Zaria didn't react. "That's okay. I'll keep asking." She kept talking to him, asking about colors he liked, cartoons he watched, what cereal was his favorite. At first, Eli's answers were short, but then he asked her, "Do you live around here?" "Kind of," she answered. "Do you go to school?" "I used to." "Why not anymore?" She hesitated. "My mom got sick. Then she passed. I've been figuring things out since." Eli looked down. "I'm sorry." "Thanks." Jonathan watched the whole exchange silently. For the first time in weeks, his son was present. After about 30 minutes, Zaria tapped Eli's ankle again. "You feel that?" Eli blinked. "A little, like pressure." Zaria looked up at Jonathan. "That's good." Jonathan crossed his arms tighter. "He says that sometimes, during his regular sessions." "Yeah." Zaria nodded. "But those sessions are in rooms with lights and machines. Sometimes kids tighten up in there. It's scary. But out here," she waved at the open air, "it feels different." Jonathan said nothing, but he was listening now. She helped Eli stretch both legs again, gently rolling his ankles and guiding his toes. "I'll show you again next week," she said, rising. "It takes time. But the muscles," she touched his thighs gently, "they still remember how to be used. You just have to remind them." Eli smiled, a real smile. "Okay." Jonathan cleared his throat. "We're not promising anything," he said quickly. "I'm not either," Zaria replied. "I'm just trying." Jonathan stared at her, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded bill. "Here," he said. Zaria stepped back. "No, sir. I don't want your money." He looked genuinely surprised. "Then why are you doing this?" She shrugged. "Because your son smiled." He turned toward Eli, who was still smiling, still calm, and Jonathan didn't understand how a little girl with nothing could give so much to a boy she didn't even know. But somehow she just had. And somewhere deep inside his tightly guarded heart, something began to crack, just a little, but enough to let the light in. The ride home was quiet, but not the kind of silence that had haunted Jonathan's car for the past 3 months. It wasn't heavy or suffocating. It wasn't that ghostly hush that settled over every inch of leather and plastic like dust on an abandoned photo. It was still, but it was alive, like the air right before a storm breaks or a piano just before the first note. Eli sat in the back seat, his blanket still wrapped over his legs, but something about him was different. His shoulders weren't as sunken. His eyes didn't stare through the window, they followed things. The passing trees, the shifting light, and once Jonathan caught him glancing at his own knees. At home, everything looked the same, but it felt altered. The pictures still hung perfectly aligned along the hallway wedding photos. Baby photos, one of Eli, with jelly on his chin. The kitchen still smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and old hope. But Jonathan's footsteps felt slower now, like he was remembering how to be present again, instead of just functioning. After dinner, he sat in his home office staring at a stack of contracts he couldn't read. The words blurred, the letters danced. His hand stayed frozen on the mouse. His mind wasn't in quarterly earnings or vendor agreements. It was in a park, on a patch of grass under an oak tree, watching a little black girl who had no formal training, no credentials, no last name he'd ever heard of, do what licensed therapists and $1,000 machines hadn't. She made Eli respond, not because she pushed him, not because she bribed or promised, but because she believed something Jonathan had stopped believing long ago, that Eli's body might still remember how to move, and that belief, it was dangerously contagious. The sound of wheels rolling across the hallway pulled Jonathan from his thoughts. He looked up as Eli's wheelchair slid gently into view. Daddy Jonathan turned fully, now surprised to see his son awake and curious this late. "Yeah, buddy." Eli's voice was soft, but clear. "Who was that girl?" Jonathan leaned back, folding his hands together. "Just someone we met. Outside the hospital." Eli blinked slowly. "She looked like..." She believed it. Believed what? That I could walk. Jonathan couldn't speak for a moment. His breath caught on a feeling he couldn't name. Then gently Eli lifted his small hands and began walking his fingers across the armrest of his chair. Tap, 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 like feet walking. "Like that," he whispered. Jonathan swallowed hard. He didn't say anything, because he couldn't. Because for the first time in months, something inside him stirred again. Not guilt, not shame, not even fear. Something more dangerous. Something he had tried to bury deep beneath logic, grief, and schedules. Hope. Dangerous, aching hope. The next day he didn't go into the office. He canceled 2 calls, ignored 5 emails, and instead stood by the window while Eli watched cartoons in the living room. The sunlight touched the boy's hair, made it look like fire. And when Eli actually laughed at something on the screen, Jonathan had to blink back a sting behind his eyes. He'd missed that sound. God, he hadn't even realized how much until it returned. Sunday came faster than expected. Jonathan debated whether or not to go. He kept telling himself it was pointless, that Zaria was just a clever child playing therapist, that Eli's progress was psychological at best, a coincidence, a fluke. But none of those excuses sounded convincing, especially not to himself. At 11:45, Zaria was already there. Same bench, same coat, same bag. But something new sat beside her today, a single bottle of water and an old folded blanket that looked like it had once been part of a couch. Her things were lined up again. Towel cocoa, butter tennis ball, warm rice cloths, all prepared like a surgeon, prepping an operating table. At noon, sharp the Range Rover rolled up. This time Eli's face was pressed to the window before they even parked. Zaria stood as they approached. "Hi, Eli," she said with a small smile. Eli's eyes lit up. "Hi, Zaria." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "So, we're on a first-name basis now." Zaria just replied evenly. "It's easier to talk when you use names." Jonathan couldn't argue, not when his son smiled like that. This time he didn't stand back. He didn't cross his arms or scowl. He helped unfold the blanket on the grass, watched carefully as Zaria warmed the rice pack in her hands before placing it on Eli's thighs. "Let me know when it feels good," she said softly. "It already does," Eli replied. Zarya looked up at him with warm, quiet eyes, then began the process again. Gentle stretches, careful rotations, no rush, no force, just patience. "Can you press your heel down a little?" she asked after a while. Eli closed his eyes, focused, tried, nothing moved. "It's okay," she said quickly. "Sometimes the brain takes time to find the right road. It's like trying to walk through a crowd. You just have to push gently." Jonathan sat on the grass behind them, now legs crossed, watching every movement. "Why do you do this?" he asked suddenly. Zarya paused, looked at the grass. "Because I remember what it felt like when my mom helped people. She made them feel like they mattered. I want to do that too." Jonathan stared at her. "You ever think of doing something else?" Sometimes she said, "But this feels right." He didn't respond, just turned his gaze to Eli's legs. The boy was trying now, focusing, engaging even when nothing seemed to happen. But then something did. His toes, barely, the slightest wiggle. Jonathan gasped. "Did you—" "I saw it," Zarya said calmly. "It's beginning." Eli looked amazed. I felt it too. Zarya smiled wider this time. "See, the body remembers." When they finished that day, Jonathan didn't offer money. Instead, he handed her something else, a sandwich wrapped in foil. He placed it beside her gym bag without a word. Zarya looked at it, then up at him. "Thank you. You earned." The fourth Sunday began the way the others had, quiet, cold, simple, but there was something different in the air, like a song that starts in the wrong key, or a sky that holds its clouds too tightly. Zarya Carter arrived as always, her small frame bundled in the same oversized jacket, her boots with the duct tape worn now to the sole, her notebook tucked safely in her back pocket, like a secret only she could read. She had everything prepared, rice-warmed towel, folded her hands, rubbed together until they pulsed with gentle heat. But this time, the Range Rover pulled up slower, and when the back door opened, Eli didn't smile. He didn't wave. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were red, his lips tight. He turned his head to the side, like someone ashamed to be seen. Zarya knew even before Jonathan stepped out and closed the door with more force than necessary. "He doesn't want to do it today," Jonathan said, not harsh, but heavy. "He's had a rough morning." Zarya stood slowly. Her eyes never left Eli. "What happened?" Jonathan looked down, jaw clenched, and rubbed the back of his neck. "He tried to move his legs this morning. Nothing happened. He got upset, said he was tired of trying, said it's pointless." Eli still wouldn't look at them. His arms were crossed, his face frozen like wet clay. Zarya stepped closer carefully, like approaching an injured animal. She knelt by the wheelchair, resting her hands on her knees. "You think I never get tired, Eli?" she asked, voice low and steady. "You think I never sat in a shelter and cried when my mom couldn't afford medicine, and I had to just sit there and watch no response?" But his eyes flicked toward her, just for a second. She continued, "You think I don't ever want to quit? I do, sometimes every day. But if you stop now, the part of you that wants to walk might stop trying too." Eli stared at the ground. His lips trembled. Jonathan stayed frozen behind them, silent, helpless. Then Eli whispered so softly Zarya almost didn't hear it. "I'm scared." Jonathan's breath caught. It was the first time he'd ever heard his son admit it out loud. Zarya didn't blink, didn't move. She just leaned forward a little closer. "Me too," she said. "But scared doesn't mean stop. It just means you're close to something big." Eli finally turned his head. He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth softened. "Okay," he said. "Let's try again." And so they did. Slower this time. Quieter. With fewer words, more presence. Zarya worked gently, carefully, rotating his ankles, brushing her thumbs against pressure points like she was reading Braille from his skin. Jonathan stepped in more, two kneeling beside them, mimicking her hand placements, listening to her every word like they were sacred instructions. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. And then, it did. Eli's right foot moved, not a toe, not a flick. But the whole foot slid forward an inch, stiff and awkward, but undeniably real. Jonathan dropped to both knees. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Do it again," he whispered. Eli did, slower. And then, one more time. Zarya didn't say anything. She just sat back, her hands folded gently, letting the boy own his moment. Jonathan looked up at her, something in his eyes raw and dangerous. He moved. You saw it. She nodded. He's remembering. That night their house was louder than it had been in months. Eli giggled on a speaker call with his aunt, excitedly reenacting the foot movement like a magician revealing his best trick. Jonathan stood outside on the porch later staring up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, he didn't wonder why this had happened to his son. He wondered what they would do next, and what it meant that the person who unlocked the first sign of healing wasn't a doctor, wasn't a therapist, wasn't even a grown-up. It was a little black girl with a bag of rice and a mother's memory, and hands steady enough to hold a boy's future. It was barely past sunrise when Zaria arrived at the doorstep of a house she never thought she'd see from the inside. Her backpack hung low on her shoulder straps, fraying at the edges. In one hand, she held a tightly rolled blanket faded with time, but clean the only thing she had left that smelled faintly of her mother. Her eyes scanned the quiet neighborhood, neatly trimmed hedges, porches with wind chimes, mailboxes without rust. This wasn't a place for girls like her. This was a place for people who had options. But she had come because someone asked, and that hadn't happened in a long time. The front door opened before she could knock. Jonathan stood there in sweatpants and a hoodie, his hand wrapped around a coffee mug, steam curling from the rim. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her. A girl too small for the world she was carrying, standing quietly on his welcome mat. "Right on time," he said finally. Zaria nodded. "I said I would be." From behind him came a thundering sound, a wheelchair flying down the hallway and skidding to a stop. Eli grinned. His face lit up like a sunrise. Zaria gave a small wave. "Hey, superstar." Jonathan stepped aside. "Come in." The warmth hit her like a blanket, real heat, not just from the vents, but the kind that came from walls that hadn't seen sadness in a few days. She stepped inside and looked around. There were shelves with books, photos on the walls, a kitchen that smelled like toast and cinnamon, and suddenly, for just a second, she felt like maybe this wasn't a mistake. Jonathan showed her the guest room. It wasn't huge, but to Zaria, it felt like a palace. A twin bed with clean sheets, a lamp, a dresser, a folded towel already waiting on the corner. She set her backpack down carefully, like placing a sacred object. She ran her fingers along the blanket. This would be the first real bed she'd slept in since the shelter. "You okay?" Jonathan asked, leaning in the doorway. Zaria nodded. "Yeah, I'm just not used to quiet like this. It's been a while since we had it too," he said softly. That day and every day after Zaria became part of their lives, not just as Eli's helper, but as something more. Every morning at 7, she would help Eli with his stretches sometimes, on the floor of the living room, sometimes under the trees in the backyard. Jonathan watched, learned, copied. At lunch, she would teach him how to warm the rice cloths perfectly, how to position the towel to balance the knees just right. In the evenings, she sat at the kitchen table, sketching quietly, while Eli colored beside her, narrating his drawings like an art critic with too much sugar in his blood. One night, as Jonathan washed the dishes, he looked over his shoulder. "Zaria," he asked, "do you ever think about going back to school?" She paused, pencil hovering over the paper. "Sometimes. You're smart. You could go far." She tilted her head. "I want to help people walk again, like my mama did." He dried his hands, leaned on the counter. "Then, let's figure out how to get you there." She smiled. A real one this time. Not the polite, practiced kind, but the soft one that comes from a place you thought had burned down long ago. That weekend back at Harrington Park, something changed. Not in Zaria, but in the people around her. The regulars were already waiting, the family with the girl recovering from a stroke, the boy with the walker. Today there were more. 5 families. A local pastor had brought folding chairs. A nearby diner had dropped off bagels and coffee on a plastic table. And everyone was waiting not for a doctor, not for a licensed specialist, but for a girl in a too-big coat and duct-tape boots who had taught their children to believe again. Zaria worked with each family one by one. She showed them how to warm the rice just right, how to hold the feet without triggering spasms, how to ask the body questions instead of giving it commands. She knelt in the dirt. She whispered encouragements. She met each child's eyes, and when asked why she did it, she only said, "Because you matter, and so do they." Eli sat quietly under the oak tree watching it all. When Jonathan asked if he was okay, the boy simply replied, "I like watching her help people. Makes me feel like I'm part of something good." And Jonathan for once had nothing to add. No warning, no condition, just a slow nod. That night when the dishes were clean and the lights were low, Zaria sat at the table sketching again. Not alone this time. Eli was asleep upstairs. Jonathan leaned on the fridge, arms crossed, watching her. "You know," he said quietly, "you changed everything." She didn't look up, just kept drawing. "I did." My son laughs again, he moves again. Not because of a hospital, not because of a miracle pill, but because a girl who had nothing showed up. Again and again. Even when no one asked her to. Zaria finally looked up. Her eyes were steady. "That's what my mom would have done." Jonathan swallowed hard. "I wish she could have seen this." Zaria smiled faint and sure. "She does. I think she sees everything." And in that moment, under the hum of the kitchen light, in a house that had been haunted by silence for far too long, something shifted completely. This wasn't just healing. This was home. And Zaria Carter, once invisible to the world, had become the beating heart of it. It had been 7 weeks since Zaria first told a stranger she could help his son walk again. 7 weeks of cracked sidewalks and warm rice packs. Of measured stretches, whispered encouragements, cautious laughter, blooming like weeds in concrete. 7 weeks of rediscovering joy in small movements, one toe, twitch, one heel, press, one proud, trembling knee. But today at Harrington Park, Zaria stood further back than usual. She had laid the towel in its usual spot beneath the oak tree, lined up her tools. With her signature precision, helped Eli through his opening stretches. But as more cars pulled in, as more families unpacked chairs, snacks, and hope, from their trunks Zaria stepped to the side and watched. 5 families last Sunday, 11 this time. There were kids of all ages, some in chairs, others using walkers, others held by parents who looked like they hadn't slept in months. Each of them had heard about the little black girl with no diploma who made a white boy move his legs. They had not come for spectacle. They had come for a sliver of belief. Jonathan had set up an extra mat. A volunteer from the diner had brought a jug of hot cocoa and passed it around in paper cups. Someone else had printed flyers, free movement classes, Sundays at noon, Harrington Park. They hadn't mentioned Zaria's name at her request, but everyone knew. She moved from family to family with quiet grace, never rushing, never lecturing, only showing. Her voice stayed low, but warm, her hands steady her eyes, always scanning not for admiration, but for posture, reaction, breath. She knelt beside a mother trying to stretch her daughter's foot and gently adjusted the angle. "Go slower here," she said. "Don't pull guide. Bodies listen better when they're not shouted at." Then she moved to a teenager sitting with slumped shoulders, his eyes cloudy with resentment. "You're not broken," she told him. "You're just learning a different way to be strong." The boy blinked, then slowly nodded. Jonathan stood nearby the whole time, wheeling Eli between stations, helping where he could. But mostly he watched her. Not just what she did, but how she did it. Zaria never once tried to be the center of attention. She didn't bask in praise. When a grateful mother tried to hand her money, she gently folded the bill and placed it back in the woman's hand. "Use this to buy him a ball," she said, nodding at the boy. "Let him feel control in his own grip." A local reporter arrived just before 1. She stood near the edge of the grass, holding a notepad, hesitating to interrupt. Jonathan noticed. He walked over, his voice firm but kind. "She doesn't want a spotlight," he said, "but if you want to write about them." He pointed toward the kids, some smiling, some straining to lift their heels, some simply watching with wide-awake eyes. The reporter nodded. She took notes, but when she asked Zaria for a quote, Zaria simply said, "It's not about me. It's about the ones who keep showing up." The story ran on page 2 of the Sunday paper. 9-year-old with a gift helps dozens heal in a city park. They didn't print her last name. That was intentional. But it didn't stop word from spreading. The next weekend, a nonprofit offered to fund equipment. A local therapist offered mentorship. Someone else volunteered free tutoring if she wanted to go back to school. But Zaria didn't change. She still laid out her same towel, still wore the same boots, still asked Eli first how his legs felt before working with anyone else. Because for her, this wasn't about building a brand. It was about remembering her mother's touch, remembering the way a body could come alive under love, remembering what it meant to matter no matter who you were. That Sunday evening, after most families had left, Eli remained sitting quietly beneath the oak tree. Zaria joined him cross-legged beside his chair. Tired, she asked. A little, he said, but it's a good kind. He looked around at the empty grass, at the footprints in the dirt, at the towel still laid out like an altar. Zaria, yeah. Do you think I'll really walk one day? She paused, then said simply, I think you already are. He looked confused. But I haven't stood up yet. She smiled. You're showing up. You're trying. You're believing again. That's walking Eli. The rest will catch up. He was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, I like helping too. She looked over surprised. You help more than you know. Jonathan watched them from a distance, arms folded, not wanting to interrupt. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to be in control. He just felt grateful for this park, for this girl, for this breath of healing in the form of a child who was never meant to lead but somehow did. And as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Harrington Park was no longer just a broken corner of the city. It was a sanctuary. And at its center, a girl who showed everyone how to move again by showing up. It was the fourth Sunday since Eli's foot first moved, and Zaria knew something was off the moment she stepped into the living room. The air inside the Reeves house was tighter than usual, like it had forgotten how to exhale. No cartoons were playing. No toast scent drifted from the kitchen. And the boy who usually smiled at her the second she appeared was nowhere in sight. Jonathan stood in the hallway, arms stiff at his sides. He's not having a good day, he said, his voice lower than usual. Won't come out of his room. Zaria tilted her head. Is it the pain? No, he muttered. It's disappointment. She nodded. Let me try. She didn't knock. She just stood outside Eli's door, her voice steady through the wood. Eli, it's me. Silence. I warmed the rice packs already. Your towel's in the bag. Jonathan forgot to fold it right again. Still silence. Then go away. The words weren't angry, they were worse, flat, hollow. Zaria pressed her palm to the door. You want to talk about it? No. Then can I sit outside your door and talk at it? No answer. She sat anyway, backpack on one side, blanket on the other. Her voice stayed low. You know, when I was 5, I tried to teach my mom how to cook rice in the microwave. I burned it so bad it turned black and made the fire alarm scream. Nothing. I cried for an hour because I thought I broke her kitchen forever. But she laughed. She said, Zaria, we can fix anything. Just don't stop showing up. The door didn't open, but she knew he was listening. I didn't stop showing up Eli, even when she got sick, even when I knew she was leaving. I still sat beside her and helped rub her legs so she wouldn't hurt at night. I knew she wasn't going to walk again, but I helped anyway, because she mattered. The door creaked open just an inch. A pale face peeked through. His eyes were red. Nothing's working, he whispered. I try every day and nothing moves. It's stupid. I'm stupid. I'm just tired. She didn't tell him he wasn't. She didn't argue. She just reached out and held up one of the warm cloth packs she'd brought. Wanna be tired together. He opened the door, a little, then a little more. When they made it to the living room, Eli didn't say much. Jonathan sat nearby, trying not to hover. Zaria knelt like always, but today her touch was even gentler. No expectations, no cheering, just warmth, presence. As she worked, she said softly, You're allowed to be mad. I get mad too. Eli nodded. I'm not just mad, he said. I'm scared. Jonathan looked up suddenly. His throat tightened. He'd never heard his son admit fear, not to him, not to anyone. Zaria didn't flinch. Me too, she said. But scared doesn't mean we quit. It just means something big is close. She kept stretching, kept watching his face. After 20 quiet minutes, she said, Can you try something for me? Just slide your foot like you did before. Eli stared at the floor. What if it doesn't move? Then we try again, tomorrow. His lip quivered. What if it never moves again? Zaria looked him dead in the eye. Then you still matter, even if nothing moves. And for the first time, Eli didn't look away. He nodded, a slow, shaky nod. Then with all the weight of his doubt pressing down, he focused. His jaw clenched, his brow furrowed, and slowly, achingly, his foot slid. Just a bit, but it slid. Jonathan gasped. Eli! The boy shook his head. I don't want to hear good job right now, Dad. Okay, Jonathan whispered. Okay. That night the house wasn't loud, but it wasn't empty either. Eli asked if Zaria could stay up late and sit with him in the living room. Jonathan brought them both cocoa. No one turned on the TV. They didn't need noise. The silence was full now of courage, of small triumph, of shared fear, not turning into failure. And when Zaria finally tiptoed to the guest room, she didn't cry, but her hand lingered on the windowsill where moonlight filtered through the blinds like a mother's hand resting gently on a child's hair. She knew tomorrow might be hard again, but they had made it through this one together, and that counted more than any footstep ever could. It had rained the night before, soft and steady, the kind of rain that didn't rush or roar, but tapped lightly on windows like it was asking to be let in. By morning, the air was cleaner, the sky a pale wash of blue streaked with golden promise. Harrington Park smelled like wet grass and new beginnings. Zaria arrived at 11:40, her backpack a little heavier than usual. She carried an extra towel, a spare set of socks, and something new, a small cloth belt, faded tan with frayed edges, the same kind her mother once used in those dusty shelters with fold-out mats and no money. Today felt different. She felt it the moment she stepped onto the field, as if the earth was holding its breath. She laid the towel like always, positioned the rice cloths, unzipped her bag, but this time she placed the belt beside her and waited. At exactly noon, the Reeves' SUV pulled up. The passenger door opened first. Eli bounced out. Yes, bounced. Not from his legs, but from his chair, moving with a spark in his face that hadn't been there before. Jonathan followed, looking rested, something softer lining the edge of his jaw. You ready, Zaria asked. Eli grinned. I've been ready since Thursday. Jonathan gave a low laugh. He's been counting down since breakfast. That's good, Zaria said, because today we try something different. Eli tilted his head. Different how? She knelt and pulled the belt from her bag. We're going to give your knees a job. You'll try to lift them and we'll help you balance. Jonathan crouched beside her, brows raised. He's ready for this. He's ready, she said. He's been ready for a while. We're just catching up. Together they placed the belt under Eli's knees. Zaria showed Jonathan where to hold the ends firm, but not tight. We don't lift him, she explained. We just guide. The control has to come from him. Eli stared at the belt. What if it doesn't work? Then we try again next Sunday, she replied. No pressure. But I think today's the day. The three of them settled into position. The crowd around them now, more than a dozen families, grew quiet. A few therapists watched from a respectful distance. Parents stood holding coffee and breath. Zaria looked at Eli. On your own time. Eli closed his eyes, took a breath. His hands clenched the towel beneath him, his jaw tensed. Then, something happened. His brow furrowed, his entire body tightened, and slowly trembling, halting but real, his knees began to lift. Just an inch. Then another. Zaria's hand stayed steady. Jonathan's breath hitched. You see that? Eli asked, his voice shaking. I did that. You did, Zaria whispered, her eyes wide but calm. You really did. Jonathan leaned forward, stunned. Son, that was all you. Eli grinned. I felt it. I didn't just move them. I told them to move. Exactly, Zaria nodded. The brain found the path. She turned to Jonathan. Now, we strengthen it. That afternoon, Eli practiced again. And again. He lifted his knees higher the second time. Slower, the third. But every movement was his. When they packed up, Jonathan crouched beside Zaria. Where do you go after this? She shrugged. Around. You got a place to sleep tonight. She hesitated. Sometimes. He rubbed the back of his neck. You ever think about staying with us? For a while, her eyes widened. You serious? I got a guest room. You wouldn't be in the way. She looked down at her hands. You sure your neighbors wouldn't mind a kid like me? Jonathan smiled. After what you've done for my son, they better not say a word. She didn't answer right away, but he saw it, the thought weaving its way into her chest like something that might stay. That night, for the first time in years, Jonathan stood in the hallway outside a closed door and didn't feel dread. He felt peace. On the other side, Eli was sleeping. In the guest room down the hall, Zaria was unpacking her tiny bag into dresser drawers she never thought she'd use. The house wasn't just full, it was alive. And somewhere in the stillness, you could hear that faint sound of change. Not loud, not sudden, but real and unstoppable. The 9th Sunday started like a secret. The morning light was soft, as if the sun didn't want to wake anyone too fast. Birds rustled quietly in the trees. The air was warm, but carried the edge of spring, trying to become summer. Harrington Park was already half full by 11:30. People had begun arriving earlier each week, not because anyone asked them to, but because hope is magnetic, and Zaria had become its quiet gravity. There were now folding chairs lined along the basketball court, a folding table where a local bakery dropped off muffins, a stack of flyers on bright green paper, free movement Sundays, bring your body, bring your courage. And still, Zaria stayed the same towel, same pack, same quiet voice. She didn't need a podium. She needed her hands, her eyes, her trust in the body's memory. At 11:58, the Range Rover pulled up. Eli's curls bounced as he waved from the window. He was already sitting taller, his core stronger now, from weeks of gentle resistance and coaxed connection. Jonathan stepped out and opened the back door. Eli shifted from his seat into his wheelchair on his own. Zaria met them halfway. She didn't smile yet. There was a gravity in her chest today, like something was coming, and the moment had to be honored, not rushed. "You ready?" she asked softly. Eli didn't grin. He just nodded, not excited, not nervous, just ready. She laid the towel. This time, right in the middle of the field. Jonathan unfolded the extra mat. The other families stayed back, forming a loose semicircle, like a silent crowd at the edge of a miracle. Zaria looked at Eli. "Same as always," she whispered. "We help you stand. You do the rest." Jonathan moved behind his son, kneeling gently, placing his hands beneath Eli's arms. Zaria positioned herself at his knees, her palms like anchors. "Okay," she said, barely audible. "On 3. Eli closed his eyes. 1. Zaria's fingers steadied. 2. Jonathan's breath caught. 3. He lifted, Zaria held, and Eli, trembling eyes squeezed shut, stood. On his own legs. His knees shook, his arms trembled, but they didn't collapse. His feet pressed against the earth held him. For the first time in 6 months he was standing. A hush fell over the field. No cheers, no gasps. Just silence. Pure and holy. Zaria's voice, barely louder than breath, said, "Open your eyes." Eli did. Slowly. Carefully. And when he saw the world from eye level again, he smiled. Not a big one, not a loud one, but a smile that belonged only to him. "I'm standing," he whispered. Zaria blinked back something warm. "Yeah," she said. "You are." Jonathan froze behind him, still holding, afraid to let go. "I don't want to drop him," he said hoarsely. "You won't," Zaria said. "He's holding himself." Jonathan loosened his grip, slowly, testing, and Eli didn't fall. "You're doing it?" Jonathan whispered. "You're doing it, son." Eli looked down. "I'm really doing it." Zaria stepped back just a little. "Now," she said. "Can you take one step?" The boy's body swayed. His legs shook, but something had changed. The connection wasn't just muscle, it was mind-spirit memory. Eli looked ahead, focused, shifted his weight, and then he moved. 1 foot forward, a real step, then another. And on the third he wobbled hard and fell straight into his father's arms. Jonathan caught him crying before the tears even reached his cheeks. "You did it," he said. "You really did it." Eli was laughing like he used to back when playgrounds and treehouses were the only things that mattered. Zaria stood still, hands at her sides. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Eli turned to her. "You said I would walk." She shook her head gently. "I said we'd try." And everyone who saw it that day, every parent, every child, every volunteer, walked away changed. Because they hadn't just seen a boy take 3 steps. They had seen what happens when you choose to believe again and again, even when the world tells you to sit down. That evening no one rushed home. They lingered, shared stories, hugged longer. And when the sky turned gold and pink, Zaria finally sat on her bench again, watching. Just watching. Jonathan stood beside her, holding a paper cup of cocoa. "You know what you did today." he asked. Yeah, she said. I reminded his body. The rest was all him. He looked at her sideways. You're going to change so many lives, Zaria. She looked up at the sky. I already am. And she was right. The story broke on a Wednesday. Second page of the Birmingham Sunday Post. Not the headline Zaria never wanted that, but a full photo beneath the fold, a small black girl kneeling on the grass beside a white boy in a wheelchair, her fingers gently pressed to his shin, his face beaming toward the sun. The caption read, 9-year-old with a gift. Helps dozens heal in a city park. Her name wasn't in the article. That had been the agreement. No full name, no school, no background. But names have a way of slipping through fences, and by Friday morning, someone had posted her photo online. Then someone else. Then came the comments, the questions, the clicks. And just like that, Zaria Carter was no longer anonymous. Jonathan saw it first. He was sipping coffee in his office reviewing invoices when an email popped up from a client with the subject line, "Isn't this your son?" Attached was a cropped screenshot of the article. Below it, dozens of reposts, hashtags, threads. Then came the questions. Who is she? Is she licensed? Why is she working with children? And beneath those uglier ones, where are her parents? Is this safe? This looks like a stunt. Jonathan's stomach turned, not from fear but fury, because none of them had been there. None of them had seen Eli's face when he took his first step. That afternoon as he drove home, he rehearsed what he would say, how he would protect her, explain, defend. But when he walked in, Zaria was already sitting on the living room floor, scrolling silently through a borrowed tablet, her face unreadable. She looked up. They found me. Jonathan set down his keys. How bad? She shrugged. Depends who you ask. He sat beside her shoulder to shoulder. You okay? I've been called worse, she said, almost smiling. But it's not me I'm worried about. Eli. She nodded. What if they shut it all down? The park, the sessions? What if they make it illegal for someone like me to help? Someone like you, he echoed. You mean someone who shows up, someone who listens, who heals without ego. Someone without a license, she whispered, without a house, without a real address. You know how people see that. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, then said, Let me show you something. He pulled out his phone and opened a video he hadn't shared with anyone yet. It was grainy, filmed shakily by another parent, but the content was unmistakable. Eli standing his knees, wobbling his hands, clinging to the air, and Zaria, calm and steady, her face radiant with patience. This is what they can't take, he said. They can doubt, dismiss, dig through your past, but they can't erase what you've done. They can't undo that step. Zaria watched it, watched Eli move, watched herself silently helping. Her throat tightened. I don't want to be famous, she said. I just wanted to help one person. You helped my son, Jonathan said. That's one? And now all these strangers want interviews and schools want me to speak and... She stopped, bit her lip. And they still don't know I sleep in your guest room and carry everything I own in a backpack. Jonathan looked at her, then let them know. Because that's what makes it real. You didn't help from a mountaintop, you helped from the ground. And the people who need you most, they're not looking for perfect. They're looking for possible. That night, Zaria sat at the kitchen table long after the others went to bed. Her notebook was open in front of her, a pencil resting between her fingers. On one page, she'd written a list. Eli's first knee lift, Eli's first step, park expansion, pressure point diagrams, mom's stretch routine, new rice pack idea. But below all that, she wrote something else. Something that felt more important than all of it. Just 3 words, still showing up. Because no matter what the world said, no matter who Googled her name or tried to fit her into their narrative, that's what mattered. That she came back, that she listened, that she gave, even with nothing, especially with nothing. And somewhere in the dark outside that kitchen window, a city breathed easier because a little girl decided not to run from the spotlight, but to quietly, humbly step into it for someone else. By the 10th week, Harrington Park no longer looked like the forgotten patch of city land it once was. The old swings had been scrubbed clean. The faded basketball court had a fresh coat of paint donated by a local hardware store that had heard about the girl under the oak. The city hadn't authorized anything officially, but no one stopped it either, because the park had become more than just grass and gravel. It had become movement, healing, A Sunday ritual where parents brought folding chairs like sacred benches and children arrived with hearts full of something doctors rarely prescribed: hope. That day more than 20 families showed up. A local church brought a canopy tent. A small string quartet, uninvited but welcomed, played gentle music beneath the tree. The reporter from 2 weeks ago returned this time with a cameraman, though she kept her promise and never stuck a microphone in Zaria's face. Everyone knew who this space belonged to, and yet Zaria never acted like it was hers. That Sunday, like all the others, she set up without a word. One towel, one rice pack, one tennis ball, one soft jar of cocoa butter. She moved among the crowd, like wind touching, adjusting, comforting, correcting. She whispered to mothers whose hands trembled on their children's ankles. She kneeled beside boys who refused to look up, until her voice reminded them they weren't broken, only rebuilding. And through it all, Eli watched. This time, he wasn't in his chair. He sat on the edge of a low bench, legs bent, feet flat. His knees, once stiff as marble, now bounced gently as he listened to Zaria speak with a new child. When Jonathan asked if he was ready to try again, Eli shook his head. "I want to wait," he said. "She's helping them today." Jonathan smiled. "She helps you every day." "Yeah," Eli whispered. "That's why I want to share her." At 12:45, a woman arrived, late, flustered, sweating, carrying her daughter in her arms. The girl, maybe 8, looked pale, her legs thin and motionless. The woman was crying. "We just heard about this," she stammered to no one in particular. "I'm sorry. I didn't know if she still had time." Zaria was across the field when she heard the voice. She turned, took in the mother, the child, the desperation. Then she walked, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. She knelt beside them, her coat sleeves rolled to her elbows. "What's her name?" "Sophia," the mother said through tears. "She had a seizure 3 months ago. Nothing's moved since." Zaria nodded. "Sophia," she repeated gently. "Hi, I'm Zaria. You're safe?" Sophia blinked. Her eyes barely tracked. But she wasn't afraid. Not of Zaria, not of her hands, not of her voice. Zaria opened her bag, pulled out the last warm rice pack. "We're going to talk to your legs, okay? They might not answer yet. That's okay. Sometimes they listen first." Jonathan watched it all from the edge. So did Eli. Everyone did. But no one spoke. No one interrupted. Because they knew what they were witnessing was sacred. After 30 minutes, Sophia's foot twitched. Just once. Barely. But enough. The mother gasped, sobbed, kissed her daughter's forehead over and over. Zaria just smiled softly and said, "She's listening now." That evening back at the Reeves house, something was different. Zaria was quieter, still kind, still present, but quiet. She helped Eli with his stretches. She showed Jonathan how to rotate the new therapy band. She even drew quietly while they ate dinner. But when Eli had gone to bed, Jonathan found her outside on the back porch, curled up in the old wooden chair with her notebook in her lap and her knees tucked close to her chest. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her eyes didn't lie. "You ever feel like you gave everything you had and it was still never enough?" He sat beside her. "What makes you think it's not enough?" "Because there's always more," she said. "More kids, more pain, more parents hoping I can do what medicine didn't, and I'm just a kid with a rice pack and muscle memory." Jonathan didn't speak right away. Then he said, "You're wrong." She looked up. "You think you gave everything." He leaned forward. "But what you gave multiplied. That park, those families. That joy in Eli's face, that wasn't a withdrawal. That was interest." Zaria blinked. "So what do I do when I feel empty?" Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You let us give back." And for the first time, Zaria let herself cry. Not because she was weak, but because for once she didn't have to carry the whole world alone. The 12th Sunday dawned warm and golden, with light spilling through the clouds like a promise kept. The air in Harrington Park felt almost electric, as if the trees and the grass and the old swing set all knew that today wasn't just another session. It was something else, something final. By noon, the park was full, every bench occupied, every blade of grass touched by laughter, gratitude, or reverence. There was a buzz of quiet energy of people arriving, not out of curiosity anymore, but commitment. They weren't watching to see if Zaria Carter could work miracles. They were coming, because in her presence they'd started to believe in their own again. Zaria stood beneath the oak tree, her hands resting on her worn gym bag, her eyes scanning the crowd. She didn't smile like usual. She didn't rush to open her towel or unpack her tools. She just breathed, slowly, deeply. "Are you okay?" Jonathan asked as he approached Eli, walking carefully beside him. No chair today, no braces. Just the boy, his father, and the girl who had brought them both back to life. "I'm fine," Zaria said. "Just feeling a lot." Eli reached out and took her hand. "I walked down the hall by myself yesterday," he said proudly. "No one helped me. I know," she said. "I heard the floor tell me." He grinned that crooked little smile he'd once been too afraid to show. And then she turned slowly and raised her voice not much, but just enough for the park to still. "Can I have your attention?" The music stopped. Conversations paused. Children turned their heads. 12 weeks ago, she said I was just a girl sitting on a cardboard box outside a hospital. I didn't have a name anyone remembered. I didn't have a school or a home or a plan. She looked at Eli, then Jonathan, then the families all around, and then one boy believed me. Not because I was loud, not because I promised him anything, but because I showed up. That's all I ever tried to do. She gestured around. You all showed up too. And because of that, this place became more than grass and benches. It became a room with no walls, a clinic with no price tag, a family without borders. People were crying now, not loud, but real. "I don't know what happens next," she continued. "I don't know where I'll study or how I'll get certified, but I do know this healing isn't a service. It's a presence, a choice, and I'll keep showing up wherever I'm needed. I just wanted you to know that you gave me more than I ever gave you." She knelt and unzipped her bag for the last time. Inside was her mother's belt folded neatly, her last 2 rice packs, a note written in the same notebook she'd carried for weeks. On it, one sentence: "Give this to the next kid who thinks they can't." She placed the bag at the base of the oak tree, a symbol, a seed. "I won't be here next Sunday," she said finally, "but someone will." That evening back at the Reeves house, they had dinner together, Zaria's last night under their roof. Eli had made her a card with stick figures holding rice packs. Jonathan had packed her a new duffel bag with fresh clothes, a toothbrush, and a pair of brand new sneakers. "No duct tape," he said, smiling. "Only miles ahead." As she zipped the bag, Zaria paused. "Why are you doing all this?" Jonathan leaned against the doorframe. "Because you reminded me what it means to show up. Not just for my son, but for people, for purpose. You didn't just teach Eli how to walk again. You taught me how to stand." Zaria looked down. Her fingers trembled. "I'm scared." "So was he," Jonathan said. "And he still moved forward." She nodded. In the early morning before the sun broke over the rooftops, Zaria stood at the edge of the driveway with her new bag over her shoulder. Eli hugged her tightly, whispering, "You gave me my legs back." She whispered back, "You gave me my name back." Jonathan opened the passenger door. A woman stepped out, short, strong, salt and pepper hair, thick glasses. "Zaria," she said, "I'm Dr. Marquez. From the Rehab Institute. We've got a spot open. It's yours, full scholarship. If you still want it." Zaria blinked. "How?" "A nurse saw you in the park, then a therapist, then a surgeon. Word travels fast when miracles move slow." Zaria turned back to Jonathan. "Did you?" He shrugged. "I just showed up." Zaria smiled, then turned to the car. To the next chapter. To the next child who would need a hand, a voice, or a rice pack. And as the car pulled away, Harrington Park glowed in the rearview mirror. Still, sacred. Waiting for the next miracle, but never forgetting the little girl who started them all with one quiet promise: I can help. Sometimes the people with the least to give the most. Zaria didn't have degrees, a title, or even a place to sleep, but she had heart, she had memory, and most of all she had the courage to show up again and again, even when the world never asked her to. In a city that almost forgot her, she helped others remember how to move, how to feel, how to hope. And Eli, he didn't just take steps. He reminded all of us that sometimes healing doesn't come from above, it comes from beside us, from someone kneeling on the ground whispering, "You're not broken. You're just learning a different way to be strong." If this story moved, you don't keep it to yourself. Comment below, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Flow Story for more true stories of quiet power, untold courage, and the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout to change the world.